are these people?
Pulling that up. So, yeah, so I wanted to show that other article to show that we've known mainstream media was telling us, even though they were kind of gaslighting us about it, that weapons and aid was not making it to its final destination in Ukraine. And since
we did the thing just last week with the weapons in Mexico.
And I'll actually get back to that, because I think that's part of it, but I kind of want to build into it first. So let's start off by going over to, I guess we'll start with page 3, or it'll tell you page 3 on the side. It might be page 4. Here, let me see if you can zoom in. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so as of February 2023, the United States has provided approximately $31.7 billion worth of defense items to the government of Ukraine. The DTR, which is the regulations for how they're supposed to be accounting for everything that gets shipped over there, prescribes documents, methods, and procedures for the Department of Defense components to transport and move defense items, including items such as those transported to Ukraine in Jastrzębie, which is Poland. All right, you can scroll down. So basically what they're discovering is, the Inspector General tracked 5 shipments. Now, these aren't just like 5 pallets, okay? One shipment can be thousands upon thousands of items, okay? So of these 5 shipments, they discovered that 3 of them were improperly recorded. So, and that could be improperly recorded from, us in the stateside, and it can be improperly recorded from people in Poland. So there's obviously fuckery going on both sides. So let's see. Let's go to page 7 or page 6, where it says background. Scroll down. There we go. Background. Okay. So since 2014, the U.S. has provided security assistance to Ukraine in form of both non-lethal and lethal defense items in aid to its defense against Russian aggression. Following Russia's annexation of Crimean Peninsula in March 2014, the Russia's support of separatist rebels in Ukraine's eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk in May 2014. The U.S. government provided Ukraine with non-lethal assistance. Now, non-lethal can mean a lot of different things, and non-lethal can mean lethal. It just depends on what you're talking about. Such assistance included night and thermal vision devices, heavy engineering equipment, and counter-mortar radars. In 2018, the U.S. government began providing lethal defense items such as javelins, anti-tank missiles, sniper rifles, rocket-propelled grenade launchers, and patrol boats. You can keep going. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. All right, I gotta pull this up. Patience, everybody. All right. Let me just get my notes over here. All right, so let me see. Okay, so let's see. On to the ramp up to military aid after February 2022. So page 7. Okay. On February 24th, 2022, Russia conducted further invasion of Ukraine. In response to this Russian invasion on March 16, 2022, the president announced the United States would dramatically increase the amount of types of defense items provided to the government of Ukraine. Through 2022, the United States provided additional advanced weapon systems such as the M777, howitzers, high mobility artillery, rocket systems, and unmanned aerial systems, and Stryker combat vehicles, along with large quantities of ammunition for those weapon systems. In addition to artillery and other assistance, including grenade launchers, 120 millimeter mortar systems, small arms, and Stinger anti-aircraft systems. Okay, so scroll down a little bit further past that redacted part. This is probably the biggest part of the whole thing.
God damn, that's a big redacted box.
So the next part is what's fucking crazy. Okay. So I thought this was the craziest part of the whole thing that kind of blew my mind. So as we know, over $100 billion in military aid has been provided to Ukraine through congressional approval, right? That being said, there's actually something called the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which gives the president executive order authority to send even more to Ukraine. Okay, so prior to 2022, okay, prior to the special military operation that Russia conducted, the limit of how much the president could send to other countries in military aid was capped at 100 million. After that, they jacked it up to 14 billion. So it went from 100 million in aid per year to 14 billion in 1 year. Okay? And you can see in that bullet right there, between March 2014 and February 2023, the United States provided approximately a total of 34 billion in announced assistance to Ukraine. Okay? So that's an executive order money. Okay? So that's on top of the 100 billion plus that we've already had congressional approval to send to Ukraine. Okay? So really problematic. I had no idea that the president was just sending money that had executive order approval to send. I thought, probably foolishly, I just assumed that all the money and aid that was going to Ukraine had to go through congressional approval. I had no idea that the president had executive order authority to send even more to Ukraine. So this is where it gets kind of funky. So let's see. You can scroll down a little bit, kind of going back.
Do you need congressional approval to send any weapons?
No, so that's what this. So the drawdown authority is executive. He can do it by executive order. So on top of the 100 billion that Congress has approved to send, there's also an additional 34 billion that has been sent in aid to Ukraine via executive order.
And do we know about that?
No, we don't know about that because it's done via executive order. That's
not public. You can't.
I mean, it's an executive order, so I'm assuming that you could probably go through the executive orders and, find manifests through that way.
I'm sure. Yeah. Okay.
But it's not like when you're watching CNN or you're watching C-SPAN or anything like that.
It's just a red of a pen.
There's a vote. He's just a stroke of his pen, and there's weapons being sent over to Ukraine. Okay, so without congressional approval. So that blew my mind. Again, went from 100 million a year, 100 million, to 14 billion. To 14 billion in less than a year. Okay, and he can cap that out. And he did 34 billion since 2021. So just absolutely, or since March 2014. So just insane amounts of money that the government. So basically, you could assume that up to an additional third of the military aid that has been sent to Ukraine has been sent through executive order. So we don't even know about it. You can call us dark money, and then if you like, we have, if you want to pull up the notes, I actually included that article about the Mexican cartels getting the javelins, but that's kind of how this stuff happens, So you have the president who can sign executive orders, letting these weapons and arms and all this stuff go over without any congressional approval, and then it's not properly getting tracked either by the Department of Defense or by Poland. And so stuff just gets magically lost, and that's how it ends up in like the hands of Mexican cartels, etc.
I see this CNN article. What happens to the weapons sent to the Ukraine? We don't really know. We just don't really.
But that's kind of what happens.
Maybe he gets sent to the Mexico black market, or who knows, something like that. I don't know. But
so
that's
yeah. So it's just absolutely insane. So if you want to go to page, I guess, 13. Let me see this. 12, 13. Yeah. So one of the findings is DoD personnel effectively transferred defense items to the government of Ukraine, but did not always have required accountability for those items. Okay. Wow. So Department of Defense personnel received, inspected, staged, and transferred defense items to the government of Ukraine representatives in Poland effectively and swiftly, often within hours of receipt. However, among the 5 shipments we observed and reviewed, and remember, this isn't like a shipment, isn't necessarily a pallet, isn't necessarily one box. It can be thousands upon thousands of items. However, among the 5 shipments we observed and reviewed, Department of Defense personnel did not always have the acquired accountability for the items received and transferred to Jasyanka. To provide oversight of the transferred defense items, DoD personnel on site created standard operating protocol that outlines specific accountability steps for each stage of the transfer process. However, during the transfers we observed, DoD personnel did not complete all required forms and count documentation or record item quantities consistently for 3 of 5 shipments of defense items. So that's 60% right off the bat. like not getting accounted for properly. 60%.
Like, why? Like, this is why I said like they're seemingly just placing all the blame on just the Pentagon officials in Poland.
Yeah, and that's another thing is like there's definitely within this documentation it does say that the people in Poland were adapted their own protocol that had nothing to do with regulations on stateside. They just basically did whatever they wanted. So yes, there was a break for Poland that wasn't doing what they were supposed to do. However, it's very clear that the Department of Defense was not keeping track accurately either. So the second bullet here, the Department of Defense could not confirm that the quantities of defense items received matched the quantity of items shipped, as the regulations require for 3 of the 5 shipments. So again, 60% of the items just unaccounted for. 60%.
That's not a good batting average.
That's awful. So when I say that this stuff magically ends up in Mexican cartel hands, it's not so hard to see how something like that could happen. Because if only 3/5 of 3 out of 5's items is accounted for, or no, 2 out of 5 items is accounted for, that leaves a lot of room for the grift. Just straight up. So, and then we can scroll a little bit to, I guess, 14. Let's see. So on 16, we can see that personnel did not fully implement standard operating procedure or receive required information needed to account for defense items. So that's saying straight up that the government itself, our government, wasn't doing their job, wasn't recording stuff properly. And again, this goes back to sometimes, like, I'm getting the impression when I'm reading this that for some of these Presidential Drawdown Authority requests, so imagine the CIA or special operations or something like that, tapping Blinken or something like that and being like, hey, we need these tanks right away. Fuck congressional approval. We need X, Y, and Z right away. President signs off. It goes to our distribution, and they're supposed to be sending it out. They're not really keeping an accurate manifest of this shit. So from the time that the executive order is done to this stuff getting shipped over to Poland, 60% of it isn't getting recorded properly. So there's already a point where our government clearly is not doing what it's supposed to do on our end. Whether that's intended or not, it's not news that the Pentagon has been historically bad at keeping track of their inventory.
And their audits too. They can't even pass a fucking audit.
Well, this is kind of like a tinfoil hat thing that's just kind of fun to remember. But the day before 9/11, Rumsfeld went and told everybody that the Pentagon had 2.3 trillion unaccounted for or something like that. So, this stuff has been going on for decades.
Not in my lifetime. They never passed an audit. Not a single time.
Never. But here it is. It's just clear as day that they can't really blame. The blame can't really fall squarely on Ukraine at this point.
Maybe we should get a new Pentagon if they're really this bad at their job. I don't know. You tell me what the solution is, because
the solution's a joke. They just say, come up with more regulations and have more box checkers to make sure that this stuff is done properly. But at the end of the day, I have a hard time thinking that some of this mismanagement isn't like working as intended. So we did the drawdown. I thought that was particularly interesting. So let's go to page 20 really quick. I'm kind of skipping around a little bit because it's really wordy. But basically, as you can imagine, is that when the government fills out an order for these shipments to go out, employees on the state side are supposed to be doing the manifests, and they don't do the manifests, or they don't record stuff properly. And then when it gets to Poland's like, hey, we don't have the manifest because we never got one. So they just make shit up, or they record it the best they can. They come up with their own protocols. So there's so much money, so much weapons just getting completely lost in transit, and nobody's being held accountable for it. and I don't see it getting any better.
You think? No.
I mean, how can they? How can they? With this sort of volume, there's no possible way that we can reasonably expect them to get this shit done properly.
Yeah.
So let's see, the military service defense agency. Yeah, so here's one on page 20. The military services and defense agencies did not consistently follow the Presidential Drawdown Authority executive order requirements for shipping defense items. Okay, so specifically for the executive order stuff. So this is the stuff that's already like the dark money, dark weapon shit. Okay, they're saying that they explicitly did not handle their shit properly on that. So I have a hard time I'm more inclined to think that the ineptitude is a feature and not an accident.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we determined that DoD personnel in Poland could not confirm that the quantities of defense items received matched the quantity of items shipped because the military service and defense agencies shipping the defense items to Poland did not consistently comply with the Presidential Drawdown Authority executive order requirements issued by DSCA. That's some government association. Specifically, the Presidential Drawdown Authority required that the military service and defense agencies coordinate the transportation of defense items into coordination with the regulations and all deliveries of cargo to Dover Air Force Base movement. So they just weren't recording this stuff properly at all. So there's definitely a big shift from us thinking that, oh, Ukraine was just grifting and cheating and doing all this crazy shit. Well, apparently a lot of us were dropping the ball on stateside as well, and I'm more inclined to think that we were doing it on purpose. And when these things are being done so quickly, that's one thing that they know is like these things are being done so fast and sometimes within a day that they just don't have any real methods in place to make sure that this stuff is recorded properly.
Oh no, the MIC they need their check. They need their check right away. Whenever that bill comes to Congress, they're getting it signed the next day.
Do you have the notes open?
Yeah.
So pull up on. Do you see on page 23 it says report on weapon transportation? I have another report. So this report is just a shipping audit. There's a shipping audit, but within this audit, there was actually another audit that they referenced to. That's an audit just on ammo, armor, arms, and explosives that they also failed. Okay, just specifically for weapons and ammunition.
So Department of Defense ground transportation.
Yeah. So there was another one, and so pull up the findings. I think you can scroll down a little bit more. You'll see findings. Maybe not. Let me see if I can pull it up. Under background, or yeah. So, okay. So yeah, under if you scroll down from background, it says finding. So the DoD and its commercial carriers transported over 100,000 armor, or arms. That's arms, ammunition, and explosives. You're on it. So just scroll down a little bit from background, and you'll go to finding.
Oh, okay.
So the DoD and its commercial carriers transfer. So basically, there's this whole other thing where it's just all this audit is tracking, the dangerous stuff. So they transported over 100,000 ammunition, arms, and explosives ground shipments from October 2016 through March 2019, based on a review of 16 accident reports, 20,000 plus not in system shipment records, and 9 reports of secure hold denials. We determined that the DoD and commercial carriers did not always transport this stuff by ground in accordance with the regulations. Specifically, the DoD did not properly pack at least 2 AA&E ground shipments as required by DTR and DoD component criteria. Okay, so they didn't verify the information about the contents. Okay, so this is 20%. Okay, so on top of the shipments being fucked, 60% of the shipments being fucked, they were miscounting and misappropriating 20% of all weapons. Okay, because there's other stuff, the shipments, that also includes stuff like night vision goggles and bulletproof vests and whatnot. So I just want to mention that there's like even another thing that they're auditing, and they're showing that 1/5 of all the weapons and stuff isn't being properly counted anyway. So it just shows another opportunity for corruption. Whether if you want to go down that rabbit hole, you could suggest that they're miscounting on purpose because, as you guys know about the CIA and all that stuff and running our covert wars, how we like to kind of facilitate the transportation of illegal arms to other countries to implement regime change through jihadis and so on and so forth. So this is another thing where I think that they kind of do this shit on purpose more than oh whoops, my bad. And I think that's probably pretty good. I guess we can go to the last page of that other audit. So they say, as a result, the lack of verification against shipping manifests is most prevalent with items such as small arms, ammunition, and night vision optics devices. As a result, there is an increased risk that the Department of Defense may be providing more or less equipment than authorized by the Presidential Drawdown Authority and may not be able to verify the quantities of all defense items transferred to the government in Ukraine. The implication here is that they could be sending too much there, and that's how this grift occurs. That's how we end up with javelins on the backs of Mexican cartels. And the other thing is that they kind of have a cover their own ass thing here, where they identified gaps in accountability that increased risk. They didn't find any evidence of loss, theft, or diversion of defense items being provided to Ukraine during the course of the evaluation. So they're trying to say, yeah, it wasn't our fault. We counted and made sure that it didn't happen, but I find that hard to believe. So at the end of the day, there were those articles from a year ago saying that only 30% were making it to the final destination. Inspector General did a report, and we're like, oh yeah, that's actually pretty on the money. They're saying 60% is not 70%, but I would say that's a margin of error there. And it's just not that we want to be reassured that our government is obviously and flagrantly misappropriating funds and being criminally miscalculating, sending out these weapons of war, these things of war to these countries. And I think that they kind of do it on purpose. Even I was telling my dad in passing that I was getting ready for tonight, and he was like, oh yeah, when I was in the military, nobody was keeping track of this shit right at all. That was 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So this isn't a new thing, but at least we have it in paper showing us that the Inspector General was saying, yeah, this stuff's definitely happening. And because of the volume, because of how much is taking place, and because the Poland is on its own program and the Department of Defense does not accurately manage its regulations at all from one day to the next, apparently, there's no reason to expect this is going to get any better. So when people like Rumsfeld say there's 2.3 trillion unaccounted for, it's really not hard to see how stuff like that happens. So in the end, fair to assume the vast majority of the budget that is going to Ukraine, 2/3, 60% of it is unaccounted for. So if we send 100 billion, not including the Presidential Drawdown Authority, just 100 billion, I think is at 110 billion, we can assume that about 60 billion worth of arms isn't being accounted for in Ukraine, isn't being accounted for in the United States. 60%, 600, $60 billion, that's crazy to me. So that's telling me that we're using the funds that are meant to go to Ukraine and meant to fund these Nazis and all that stuff is obviously being used to fund multiple wars at the same time. I would say, especially with that kind of revelation to me about the Presidential Drawdown Authority and being able to use the executive orders, there's no doubt in my mind that that's how that kind of dark money and those kind of weapons kind of flow into the recipients it's not supposed to be going to. And we'll never know. We'll never know.
And you wonder why, whenever you ask, hey, how about we just, track where these weapons are going, make sure, it's accountable. If we're going to send all this money, we're going to spend all this U.S. tax dollars on weapons to for Ukraine's democracy. Isn't it only fair that we deserve to know where the money's going?
See, and this is the problem when you have a country like ours that just prints its own money. The dollar signs, the like number of zeros is doesn't really mean anything to our Congress, because it's just like a line in a computer screen. It's not like they're literally printing money. They're just
they just have to press a couple more zeros.
They just transfer the money in zeros and like on a computer from one account to another. So there's not really any accountability there. Nobody cares because the U.S. can print its own money. And we just see it as inflation. But I don't anticipate this getting any better anytime soon. And I would expect that Presidential Drawdown Authority to get even worse. When it said it went from 100 million to like almost 15 billion, I almost shit myself. I was like, are you kidding me? In 1 year, they're like, all right, we're just going to give the president executive order authority to just send up to 15 billion in weapons aid a year to wherever, and even that wasn't accounted for.
And you're right about like how quick it is about
it's literally like, that's why I think the executive order stuff is so dangerous and so nefarious, because it's some dead of the night shit. Like, oh, we need this stuff immediately. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And then there's no accountability.
It's just like, it's literally just a blank check. It's just a check.
I mean, that's kind of how I see it. Obviously, like, one can assume that the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, goes to the president and says, hey, we need X, Y, and Z. But if you assume 3 out of 5 items is mismanaged or misappropriated or never makes it to its intended destination, then I would think the DoD is purposely fudging their numbers, taking that into consideration. Another thing that was in this article, and because for whatever reason it's not working properly on my screens, one of the other things that they were noting is that part of the Department of Defense regulations for shipping military items to other countries is that there's supposed to be a scheduled flight for those items. Okay, they're supposed to schedule it out, but that doesn't happen. Okay, they'll be like, oh, this shipment will go on this flight because it's already heading to Ukraine anyway. And then, oh, there's no more room in that shipment. All right, we'll wait for another flight to come in and we'll put the second half of that shipment on this one, and then we'll send it out. So there's stuff getting lost in transportation. There's stuff not making onto the right flights. There's stuff not being accounted for properly. Like, just every step of the way, there's an opportunity for stuff to get lost and stuff to get mismanaged.
And Ukraine itself is already, it's like since 2014, has already been a troll for black market weapons.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like known for like having a black market weapons trade for terrorists all around the world.
I mean, I remember, I don't know if I was watching the Gray Zone or something like that, but no, they have I was seeing something, I think it was on Gray Zone. They were showing basically like an eBay for freaking weapons. Like they did like the Silk Road thing. They were showing like freaking Ukraine javelins.
I've seen it too. Yeah, you can.
Just crazy.
U.S. military weapons online.
So you could kind of. It stands to reason you could see something happening where the U.S. government is sending more than they're supposed to Ukraine, so that Ukraine can facilitate other wars in other countries that the U.S. is fomenting. Does that make sense? Like we're using the misappropriated shipments and the unaccounted for shipments that are supposed to go to Ukraine, and telling the Ukraine guys, hey, some of that stuff needs to make it to Mexico. Some of that stuff needs to go to Colombia. Hey, some of that stuff needs to go X, Y, and Z. You can keep the money.
Yeah.
You can keep the money.
I'm trying to imagine how these deals are going out in their heads.
But I mean, I know it's funny and I know that sounds crazy, but like I could literally see something like that happening. Hey, like, don't forget, you got to put 3 out of every 5 javelins on the Silk Road eBay. They're supposed to be going to Colombia. Like, I could see something like that happening and I wouldn't think twice of it.